Good afternoon and welcome to our Mulberry Talent Partners Leadership Conversation. I'm going to give participants just a few more moments to continue logging on. Okay, looks like everyone is beginning to join well, so we can go on ahead and jump right in. So again, welcome to our Mulberry Talent Partners Leadership Conversation. We're so excited to have you here with us today. Just jumping into a little bit about Mulberry Talent Partners. We are a full service staffing and recruiting agency headquartered in Portland, Oregon, with an additional office in the San Francisco Bay Area. We specialize in the professional placement of human resources, professional and financial office, payroll and operations positions for direct hire, temp to hire, and contract positions. I would encourage you to check us out online at mulberrytalent.com, where you can browse through our full suite of service offerings for client organizations. Jumping into introductions, today we are joined by our fabulous founder and president, Lauren Francis. Lauren founded Mulberry Talent Partners in June of 2017, bringing over 25 years of talent acquisition and entrepreneurial experience. Welcome, Lauren. And today we have our guest, Terry Smith, who we're pleased to welcome back for, I think, the third time to our conversation series. Welcome, so, yeah. Terry. Terry is a senior leader in human resources and change management, specializing in strategic and operational management. He has led HR and manufacturing, web-based educational services, software development, medical device technology, and other industries. His background includes 3 different startups, 2 Fortune 500s, and several mid-cap firms. He's currently consulting through Andrea Jones Consulting in Portland, Oregon. His particular focus over the past decade has been on building organizational capability and success through effective program and system design and implementation to ensure that staff can succeed and find value in their work. And if I didn't introduce myself, I'm Laura Back. I'm the Director of Marketing and Events at Mulberry Talent Partners. We will save some time at the end for questions. So if you have any questions that come up during the session, please feel free to use the Q&A feature here, and we will save some time for those at the end. So without further ado, I'll pass it on over to Lauren and Terry.
Terry, thank you so much for joining us once again
at
the noon hour. We're happy to have you back. And I know that one of your previous webinars, the STAR method has exploded in terms of the number of views, and people have really benefited from it. So we really appreciate that. And I know that our candidates do too. So thank you for that.
Oh, my pleasure.
Yeah. So we can just jump right into it here.
Sure.
Last month, you shared a post on LinkedIn that went viral, and you called me and just said, Lauren, we've got to talk about this. And so tell me more about the post and tell everyone about that.
Sure. So the post was a share of an article in the Harvard Business Review that came out in mid-September that talked about the patterns of resignation that were occurring at the time. And so it came out on a Wednesday, and then I reposted it on Thursday morning, a few hundred views and so forth. By late in the day, the views were in the thousands. And by the time we got to Saturday morning, it had been reshared several times, and the view hits were over 70,000. And by the time we got to about Tuesday or so, it was at 119,000 views. So it really just took off.
Mm-hmm. And so this was the Harvard Business Review article about the Great Tsunami.
Yes, Resignation Tsunami.
Tsunami. Okay. And so why do you think that post resonated with so many people and was so popular?
Yeah, I think it was a good example of timing and topic combined. Mm-hmm. As I said, it was mid-September. Prior to that, there really wasn't much out there on the subject. There was, but you had to go find it. And then this piece comes out with a very impactful number, 4 million people resigning their jobs in the month of April. And that was the hook. And then the fact that it came out on one day and I pushed it out the next day kind of gave it an additional sense of urgency. Mm-hmm. And, if you get something out in front of a few folks and it's kind of hot, especially something that has that emotional impact, 4 million people, that's a big number. Suddenly people want to be in on that right away. And I think that's kind of the combination that made it work.
Mm. So the subject of the Great Resignation, it seems to have taken on a life of its own. And do you think it's a phenomenon? What's driving it? Is this ongoing? I mean, you mentioned April, and I was like, okay, it started in April. I kind of there was people started talking about it at the end of the summer more.
Yeah.
And so there you go with the September article for HBS. But anyway, so tell us more about what's driving this and this phenomenon itself.
Well, first of all, I do think it's pretty real. In fact, in July, Microsoft did a similar study internally. They polled 30,000 of their workers, which oddly enough is a percentage, but nowhere near the complete community. But they came away with information that causes them to believe that over the next couple of years, they could see as much as a 40% voluntary turnover rate of people walking away from their jobs. Then in September, late September, Inc. magazine took a look at the resignation numbers for Q2, so April through June. And that number was 11.5 million people in Q2. And then about a week later, USDOL confirmed that number. And then, so you've got, roughly speaking, 1 million people a week walking away from their jobs. And then to top it off, recent data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics shows that resignations between March and July, 19 million people, much worse even than what we'd heard originally. So we don't have Q3 numbers yet, but to your question of, is it a phenomenon? Is it temporary? Don't know yet. Q3 will tell us a lot, but based on what we've seen so far, I don't see any real reason why the number would go down particularly. So that, I think it's real. I want to inject a quick note of caution that, a lot of the sort of the follow-on studies that are coming out of this are talking about the percent of people who are just considering leaving their current job. Doesn't mean they're actually doing anything about it. So the challenge there is sifting through that data in terms of, well, prior to COVID, how many people were considering leaving their jobs, and we all know that we all consider making changes from time to time. The point now, though, is that we're more hyper-focused on it because of the circumstances and the situation. Just to bring that resignation number home a little bit, U.S. News and World Report did a study of the March statistics across all 50 states, and they found that, among other things, Oregon was tied for 7th among the highest, voluntary resignation, voluntary turnover rate across the entire country. So, Oregon's definitely on the move. So those are some of the numbers, and you were asking the question, what's driving it? And I think a lot of that depends. The survey data, a lot of respondents are saying that they're looking for more flexibility, the kind of flexibility that they've been kind of compelled into by the circumstances by the last year or so. That ties together with people realizing that there are lots of ways to juggle work and home considerations without having to commute and all the wear and tear that goes along with that. So that's one thing, is that flexibility. Other folks are saying that they don't feel safe coming back to work, which is fair. It reflects a bit on people's concerns about, their employers' protocols around making sure that it's safe to come back to work. And maybe there's other options and alternatives if employers are saying, no, you got to come back to work. Other folks are just realizing that, hey, maybe there's a better gig out there. I'm working for low wages, I'm working a ton of hours, and working conditions aren't the best. And, maybe there's other opportunities that just make more sense than what I'm doing now. The folks at Fast Company, just to give you a bit of an angle on this, are calling this actually the great reprioritization. People are figuring out that there are priorities beyond the work that they've become accustomed to. And the circumstances have given them the opportunity to maybe consider that and even act on it. So those are some of the things I think that are driving it.
So this is all industries. Do they they talk about all industries, all professional levels? Is there any statistics on that you can?
Yeah, great question. Actually, I'm glad you mentioned that, because there was a great piece in Axios this morning on this very topic, that the sort of world of software development, as an example, is getting hit. It's always been kind of a mobile community of folks, but they're getting hit especially hard right now. And this article just came out a couple of days ago. I haven't had a chance to really go through it in detail, but that's an example of an industry that's getting hit. The HBO article didn't go into a ton of detail about specific industries, so that's one aspect to consider. Some industries are getting hit harder than others, and so that's something to consider. But it's interesting that this piece in Axios pointed at the community that we all here in Portland know fairly well, that software development community, and they're really taking a significant toll in terms of this kind of turnover.
Mhm. You know what, in terms of the people that I've been working with, I hear a lot about burnout more than I hear of other things. I think there's that. I also hear about the idea that COVID sort of allowed people the space to kind of look at their lives and look at their work differently,
Mhm.
and to really look at it and to make some significant changes and think about what they wanted their future to look like,
Right.
and how their work and their life sort of work together.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people that have resigned from positions without another position, really making some very some decisions that were impacted their situation, but also allowed them to make a change and think about how they wanted to move forward in their lives.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so, yeah, so I think that is significant in itself. And I wonder if the space and time that COVID brought uh, was a pretty was a big part of that for people.
Well, I think so. I think that certainly burnout is a key factor as well. In fact, there's a great piece that came out in the Human Resources Executive Journal that goes around on that very topic. That burnout is a key factor in this whole discussion. Again, something I just picked up and read this morning, so I didn't have a chance to really incorporate it into this conversation. But I think that's a big component of it. The COVID circumstance has also kind of created an environment where there are a lot of employers who are saying, well, gee, remote work is really what's doing it. People are now maybe, kind of reorienting themselves to this different lifestyle and so forth. And, they just don't want to come back to work. And so that's a consideration as well, is that, employers, I think, really need to refocus that lens a little bit. And we'll talk a little bit later about some of the things that managers and HR leaders can do to address this. But yeah, I think you're right on the money there.
Well, you mentioned too that there was that the idea of remote work is the culprit, is the driver here, and
Yeah.
that people have, there's this idea that people have gotten lazy or too comfortable working from home. And
Yeah.
What do you have to say to that?
Well, I actually think that's true in certain senses, but not the way most people might think. I think what it's done is it's exposed some weaknesses in our basic business model. One example of that, we've spent decades promoting, people in a wide variety of different industries, fast, right? Because the industry overall has been growing and growing, and we've been promoting people and so forth. And, oftentimes we do promotions for the wrong reasons. And at the same time, we're not, as a culture, the best at doing a lot of good training on managing people. So the net effect is that there are people who are in management roles who are very challenged by being in management roles. And that has become even more acutely obvious these days, because now not only do you have the work that still needs to be done, which is getting done in a lot of cases, but you also have this whole extended relationship where you're no longer face to face. And even the best managers, people who are inherently really, really good at it, are struggling with that challenge of engaging remotely on a regular basis. So I think in a certain sense, you can say, yeah, the remote work is a culprit, but I would maybe characterize it as being more the accomplice than the perpetrator.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So what can managers do
Yeah.
to get ahead of this tsunami and to keep people from leaving their jobs?
So I've got 4 points I want to talk about around that. First one is this. And by the way, there's a ton of information being circulated out there right now about what managers can do. Lots and lots of folks are weighing in on this topic. And so I don't propose to have like the perfect answers, but these are kind of the 4 things that resonated for me. First of all, be aware as a manager or as a leader of your impact.
Mm-hmm.
People watch leaders and managers all the time. Whether you realize it or not, you're being watched.
Mm-hmm.
I don't mean to sound paranoid, it's just a fact. So pause and consider how you're showing up with your words and your actions. Are you aware of how your concerns and your own frustrations are being experienced by your teams? Are you unintentionally adding to the fear and anxiety? When you become more aware of that, you can control it and steer it in the right direction. So that's point number one. Point number two, I encourage you to focus on potential and possibility. This is a uniquely disruptive time frame that we're in. It's time to be grounded in pragmatism and blend that with possibility and gratitude and recognition of what your people are doing and how they're showing up and what they're going through. So I would encourage managers of staff to get curious and ask, what do you envision as the best possible outcome for the situation we're in? And what excites you about that vision? And what does that give you as an individual? And what does that give us as a team? And what does that give the organization? When you change the rhythm of your communication to that kind of style, the impact of potential and possibility begins to really outweigh that sense of fear and uncertainty. So that's the second point. The third point, and this is a real interesting one, make it okay to leave. And what I mean by that is how you as a manager and others in your organization react when people leave. In way too many companies, and you and I have seen this happen for years, when an employee gives notice, the reaction is not unlike an emotional breakup. As an employer, you've been left, you feel rejected. And oftentimes this triggers some not so good behavior around, for example, tendencies to make the person leaving be wrong somehow, or to doubt their trustworthiness and or their integrity, even though that wasn't the case before they decided to leave. There's a penchant that I've seen, and I'm sure we all have, to dismiss their presence and devalue their contribution to the organization. So I would encourage us as leaders to think deeply about what this type of behavior signals, not only to the person who's leaving, but also those people who are still there and are still watching. So I would suggest as an alternative, is to take that transition with gratitude. It's helpful to understand, and we all know this, lifelong employment is really not on the table anymore. And with rare exception, your folks are working with your organization as part of their overall career journey. They've contributed to you, and hopefully they've learned some new things, but they're not the same person as when they started, nor are you the same person as when they started, nor is the organization the same as when they started. So what would it be like when that resignation occurs? To give voice to those things, and from both sides of the relationship. And what would you create if you pause to make those kinds of acknowledgments? And rather than viewing a resignation as rejecting the relationship, what could be possible if you start to view it as an inflection point? So all that boils down to my fourth point, which is simply give your employees the respect and the attention they deserve. The marketplace has shifted. You need to think of your employees. I think this is a really interesting way of looking at this. Think of your employees as your customers. And think about what it takes to retain customers. Okay. This is the first step really in terms of that whole attrition process. And it doesn't happen when they feel ignored in the fever of, as we know, we've got people leaving, so we've got to hire new people, and there's a real energy around hiring new people. And sometimes that energy, the backwash of it, can be a sense of the people who are in place now are maybe a little overlooked and a little underappreciated. And that leads to that sense of being taken for granted. And healthy relationships just don't work well when you do that. So those are my four things.
Those are just so powerful. I love the idea of treating your employees as customers and what you do to retain customers. That is key. And then, of course, when people leave, that is another. My nephew just finished working for Apple. He's in the Bay Area and finished working for Apple. He was there for 10 years. And his last day at 4:00, when his shift was over, they had a clap out ceremony where all of the, all the staff and anyone who was in the Apple store, clapped and cheered him on.
Nice.
Which is a wonderful celebration and tradition that they have. And so think of it that way, as you sort of celebrate the person, whoever the individual that was there and their contribution, as much as you celebrate people that join the organization. And so it's really how you treat people in all situations, which is so important. And I one of the consultant that I work with, she said, employees are looking at their leaders in a different way today. Yeah. They're looking at their behaviors.
Yes.
And how they show up and their intention.
Yes.
And that really just stuck with me.
And that's really what it's about. It's about how you show up and how you comport yourself, for all the things that we just talked about.
Right. And the things that are important, and the things that are important to, meeting the employees where they are, and what is important to the employees. So, it could be something as small as, maybe the day before Thanksgiving, instead of going all the way till 5 o'clock, finish early and just make that a surprise day off, or finish it at noon or whatever. Just there's so many things we can do to support the employee where they are. Like, what would I want to see in my life from an employer? Right. And it really makes a difference. And it has to be authentic. It can't be manufactured as like, okay, what are the 10 things we're going to do to retain employees?
It's true.
It really has to come from a place of full transparency and meeting people where they are.
Yeah, you're dead on. You have to be not only transparent, but you have to be real about it.
Yeah.
You can't just say, look at me, I'm being transparent.
Right.
That doesn't work.
It doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
What else are you seeing from this, the Great Resignation? And, I think for me, looking at it, is this, you mentioned the numbers and they're staggering.
Yes.
Is this what are we to anticipate here?
Well, if I had that answer, I'd write the book and sell 1 million copies and retire. And I'd have to write it really fast because it's going to happen really fast.
Right.
But I think it's a remarkable characteristic of our culture that we need oftentimes a major event, a catharsis of some kind, in order to really reassess our circumstances and our situation, and we've been going along on a roller coaster of employment in many, many forms for decades. And this has knocked us completely off that roller coaster. And we're now really having to grapple with the fact that the work environment has changed. The workforce, if you will, has really had the opportunity to step back and say, wait a second, I'm not really sure about this. And so I think, and technology, of course, has played an integral part of this. Look what we're doing right now. We're having a conversation between us that other people are participating in, which I'm really glad people are. But that's something that, go back 5 years, we couldn't do.
Right. We weren't even thinking about it.
So, right. So, now that we know that we can do these things, let's be creative, and we are, about how we operate in this new world. And not just this new COVID world, but this technology world, this place that now all of a sudden is much, much smaller. Even, they talk about the global village. Global village is getting smaller and smaller all the time, because we can, it would be great, for example, if we knew that somebody that's listening in with us today is in, Germany someplace, or, and that's possible now with technology. So that kind of stuff is really, really fascinating, and it augurs in possibilities that just weren't in place a few years ago. So I think the landscape is really, really wide open right now.
Wow, it really is. And I see it so much in the candidates that I talk to and the clients that I talk to about, what's happening within their organizations. And, And the things that are hard for employees, and it's all of what you're talking about, and it's really embracing the technology you're saying, and utilizing it to our advantage, to the advantage of the individuals that we employ, and to our customers, and to our culture. Right.
Agreed.
Right.
Yeah.
And culture, it's so interesting too. The interview process has changed a lot too. There are so many more questions that are coming from the candidates about the organization, the structure, so many different inquiries that were not necessarily common a few years ago.
Absolutely. And I think that's going to continue to evolve.
And again, the transparency that organizations, hey, we've been in a tough spot, or this is where we've been, this is where we're going, and this is how we're going to get there. So painting a picture, being very honest and open about the conditions, because no organization is free of challenges.
Correct.
Right.
Absolutely correct.
Right. So Laura, I know we had a couple of comments and maybe some questions.
Absolutely. So this first question came from Brian. Thank you, Brian. Is the overarching sense that employers could be preventing this migration by constructing more flexible workspaces or workplaces and better employee retention programming?
Not to sound corny, but sort of yes to all of those things, right? I mean, it really is not any one single lever that you pull that's going to make the difference. It's how you go about very effectively and authentically pulling lots of levers, and really looking at your organization in terms of how can we do what we do better than what we did before, and how can we be sure that we're really engaging with our staff to be sure that we're hearing what they're saying.
Right. I also hear too that so many companies have very successfully created stretch assignments for their employees, and career pathing and mentorship, and some have done it really well, and others have not made haven't had so much success. And so what employees are looking for is not only a culture that matches them, but they're looking for an organization that they have an opportunity to continue to grow within that organization, and companies have an opportunity to create that.
Yeah, I think so. And that's challenging because it compels you to really think very strategically about where your business is going and how you can really engage and, let's be honest, leverage the talent that you have inside the organization so that your business is successful and the people in the organization are succeeding on their own terms, right?
The next question that came in from CCA Human Resources is, how do the number of resignations this year compare to previous years? The numbers sound really big and kind of scary, but it's helpful to compare to previous years. Do you know how big of an increase it was, Terry?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the simple answer is I don't. The focus on the information that I've been working with has been more sort of, current time and forward thinking. I'm sure the data is out there, but we'd have to go mine it a little bit more, which is definitely something that's worth looking at. I would be willing to bet, though, not that I'm a gambler, but I'd be willing to bet that the numbers are elevated relative to previous years, pre-COVID, and during the first sort of year of COVID. Now that we're starting to kind of feel a little bit of more control over the COVID scenario, we're starting to really reevaluate. And so a lot of people are just making those decisions, but no, don't have a good track to that prior data.
Sure. Good. Well, and we had a lot of really nice comments. Thank you everyone for hopping on to chat to share your feedback and your insights as well. Really appreciate keeping this conversational. So that brings us to the end of today's leadership conversation. Thank you all for joining us today. We know you have a lot of options when it comes to webinars, so we appreciate you flying with Mulberry. And thank you, Terry and Lauren, for a very engaging and timely conversation. These are some ways that you can stay in touch with Mulberry Talent Partners. I would encourage you to connect to Lauren and both Terry online, on LinkedIn if you haven't already, because they are both actively sharing some really great and relevant content out there. So thank you again, Terry, Lauren, and everyone who joined us today. Until next time.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Okay, have a good week. Bye-bye.